Hello. I'm here to talk to you about AI tools at our AI-themed company. Just going to chuck that over there. Specifically, I'm going to talk about where I don't use AI to code, and I don't think that you should either. Which, might be a little controversial here at Clio AI, but I think it's an important thing to talk about and think about critically how we use our tools. So I'm going to start out with some specific examples. I went to ChatGPT, as people have described doing, and I asked it for a compact and readable FizzBuzz in Ruby. Quick question. Does this code work? Like, is this valid, FizzBuzz? It's 1 to 100 each do. We do some modulos here, and then we do that, which is certainly compact for some definitions of compact. GPT is very handy here. It says, this strikes a balance between clarity and conciseness, which I am not sure that I agree with. This does work. This is valid Ruby. It functions. This is a complete mess of a ternary. It is not readable. It has no concept of what human readable means. It's extracted out this logic and then only used them once. It's doing an and on these because it's set them as like true and false, and then it uses them again over here. It's genuinely a complete mess of a thing. This is something where if you don't know what readable means, if you're not particularly experienced, it's plausible that you could think this is readable. The spacing's fairly nice. It looks fairly well laid out. It's not hideous to look at. You might think, if you don't know, that this genuinely is readable, that any challenge you have trying to read this is from you, not from the code being bad. So I thought, I'll give it something a little bit more tricky. I asked ChatGPT, can you write me a scope to do the latest user in Rails? So I said, please implement a scope to return only the latest user in Rails, sorted by created at. It's like, okay, in Rails you can do a scope. Here's how you implement it. You do scope latest, order created at, limit 1. Created at will sort the users in descending order based on the created at column, and limit 1 will ensure only the most recent user is returned. Does this one work? Hands up if you think it works in the office, please. Okay, hands up if you think it doesn't work. We have some maybe hands up. So the answer here is yes, this works for a given definition of works. But I personally, if I call user.latest, expect to get a user, an individual user. See, Gavin is already getting ahead of the slides here. It's not a scope. It is a scope, but we're sort of doing a non-scopy thing here. This will return to you an association containing one thing and one thing only. It won't return you a single user. But I don't want it to return me an association with one thing in it. I want only a single user. So I say to ChatGPT, I don't need first, it's the latest user already. And it says, oh, well, if you want to use the scope to directly return the latest user without needing first, you can achieve this using take within the scope itself. It corrects itself to do what I actually wanted. And now we have a different scope that says order by created at, and then we do take. And it explains that this fetches a single record directly from the ordered query, which is the most recent user in this case. Again, we have the question like, does this work? Is this going to validly do things? Murad looks really distressed, but says yes, it works, which is the correct answer. It does work. This functions. It will return to you a single user. This is the wrong thing to do in Rails. This is not how scopes should behave. Scopes should always return an association. It should always be chainable with other scopes. This is not chainable with other scopes. If I do user.active.latest, it will work. If I do user.latest.active, it's not going to work because active is something that would be a different scope that we might have on the user. It doesn't know to tell me that this is not the right way to solve this problem. So I tried Googling it, which is, the traditional way to solve these problems as a software engineer. Create a latest user scope in Rails. We have this little Stack Overflow that says, I want to create a scope to get the latest books that are owned. This is not actually relevant to us directly. But down here, we have a really interesting thing, which is somebody complaining they are using a scope with last and it is returning an association relation in a view. They don't want it to be doing that. They want it to be returning just a single thing. And somebody in the comments here explains what you want is wrong. The thing that you are asking it to do in a scope, it's not what you should be asking. You should be asking for a different solution. And to be clear, the code that they write here also kind of isn't right. It just kind of doesn't really work properly. But I would expect you generally to take stuff somebody has randomly written on the internet as not an authoritative source. Even if it's got a little tick next to it on Stack Overflow, you still might check that it works. You still might go and read the documentation. I have seen people using ChatGPT and similar things as a replacement for going and looking at the real documentation, when in practice those things are trained on things like this. They're not trained primarily on documentation. They're trained primarily on internet. And the internet is mostly not documentation by volume. It is mostly people having opinions on various different code advice sites, which may or may not be good. And this is the big point that I want to try and make here. ChatGPT at no point said to me, the question that you are asking here, the thing you want to do is wrong. You should not be building a scope that returns a single thing. But the moment you go to the Rails documentation to try and understand how to build a scope, it will be very clear to you immediately. Scopes always return an association. It will explain the intention behind that and why that is. It is really the point of an LLM for it to answer a question with confidence and with as much clarity as it can. They are not built to challenge the things that you have asked of them. They are built to give you confident answers to the questions you pose. And that means that they aren't a good replacement for documentation or for talking to somebody who's more experienced, because they will not make you reassess whether what you want is what you should really want. They have a few different things that I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about as well. Using these as a major tool is going to slow down the development of your key skills. And this is one of the things that I think is the most kind of challenging with how they have appeared in programming spaces. This is a risk that mostly exists for less experienced developers, but the adoption has mostly come from more experienced developers. As an experienced developer, you know the difference, often on site, between code that does what you want and code that doesn't. You can easily filter out the 60% of the time that it gives you garbage and take the 40% of the time that it's using it correctly. Similarly with code using libraries, you know what good Rails looks like if you've been writing Rails for a decade. So you can tell when it's using the interfaces correctly. If you don't, then you won't know until you try and write tests for it that you've spent 20 minutes calling a function that simply has never existed in Rails. And you will not get told that there is a better way to do this. Something that I have benefited a lot from in my time as a software engineer is reading documentation and discovering that the thing I want to do is a much more complicated version that I have invented myself of a thing that's already built into the library. I have spent half an hour, 3 hours, sometimes multiple days implementing things that I just didn't know the name of, and then I found there was an actual thing that already did that. It's not going to be able to tell you that. If you ask it to solve a problem, it will help you to solve that problem. It will not tell you that problem is not the right problem for you to be wanting to solve. They are optimized for confidence, not for correctness. They're tuned to give plausible answers, things that look right, but real code is weird. This is something that I talk about a lot. If you came to my most recent tech talk, I gave some examples of this in Ruby. There are plenty of idiosyncrasies and things that are confusing and unintuitive that are left over artifacts of history from a decade ago, and they don't look right when you use them. And because they don't look right, you won't get those things from ChatGPT, from SuperMaven, or whatever. And as I sort of said earlier, you can learn more than you ask for with serendipity. When you go and actually look at the documentation, you may not actually find a better way of doing what you're doing, but you may see a function that sticks in your mind a little bit, and then later you're solving a different problem and you're like, hang on, I was reading the Rails documentation like 3 weeks ago for a different thing. Wasn't there a function that does something like this? ChatGPT is not going to do that ever. It is not going to answer half of a question that you might have in the future. Scanning through a page of documentation will do that. It will build your sense of what a library, a system can do. And this is something that, again, I feel more experienced developers using AI notice less. It will shortcut past valuable signals. When I'm implementing code, the implementation of code is not wasted time. I'm not doing nothing with my brain while I am typing. While I am filling in the implementation of a particular piece of code, I'm thinking to myself, is this the right place to be doing this? Does this feel right? Does having this logic here make sense? Should this not be a service and instead be a model, for example? If I've just tab completed 6 lines of code and then I've scanned it and gone, yep, that looks like it should do the right thing, I don't have the time to feel those feelings. I don't have the sense that I get while typing it that what I'm doing is wrong, that I would build otherwise. And similarly, we have this, is this code intuitive or is there a better way? We are primed as human beings so easily. It is so easy to get a human being to be unable to solve a problem for themselves. And the best way to do it is to show them a solution to the problem. And that's what these things will do a lot of the time, particularly the ones that are going to like autocomplete a thing. The moment you see that, the moment you understand the code that it's written, it stops your brain so easily being able to reach for a solution yourself, a solution that I genuinely believe you are all capable of doing in a way that may be better than AI. I know that might be a bold claim, but I think we can solve problems better than the AI can a lot of the time. And I think by letting the AI go first, we weaken our own ability to do that. And I think that is a really valuable thing to keep and to build as developers. So in summary, I don't use AI to code, and I think that you shouldn't either. That doesn't mean that there aren't times and places for these things. It's not unuseful to bounce questions off. But I encourage you to, in the same way that I hope you would if you were to read something on Stack Overflow, to go and check that it actually does what it says. And not just by writing tests, but by going and reading the documentation, by going and seeing what things there are that may solve this problem differently to how AI could do this. It's no different than a random person on the internet because it is the average of random people on the internet. And you should treat it with about as much trust as you would a blurred version of every answer on Stack Overflow.